Hi, Jesse here with eTrailer. Today we'll be taking a look at and I'll show you how to install the DeeMaxx disc brakes on our 2018 Keystone Cougar Half-Ton Travel trailer. When I say they're easier to maintain, what I mean is not only are the pads and rotors a lot easier to replace than drums and shoes, where with the drums you'd have to mess with springs and all that, but also a nice thing is you can see your pad life through the wheel spokes. So to check on how much life you have left in your brakes, you don't even have to take the wheel off. Whereas with the drums, you'd have to remove the wheel and then the drum, and then you could finally see the shoes. It's just a lot easier to make sure that your rig is ready to go. The reason why disc brakes perform so much better is you have more of a braking surface, and also they're a lot more efficient with cooling. As you can see, these rotors are vented, so there's fins going through, and they also have holes on the side. And you also just have more air hitting the brakes constantly while you're driving down the road, and that's going to greatly improve your performance. These holes here are not only for air to get through them, but also they work as drainage holes, so no water will get stuck in here. And not only do you have those drainage holes, but also the caliper, the bracket, and the rotor all have a corrosion-resistant max coating. This kit only includes the caliper assembly, so that's pads, caliper, bracket, and the rotor. So you will have to get separately, or if you already have them, idler hubs, along with brake lines, and then an actuator to get everything working. As far as the install goes, it's pretty similar to installing brakes on a vehicle, so if you've done that before, most likely you can handle this pretty easily. Just a few extra steps, but other than that, it's basically like doing brakes on a car. If it's not something that you're comfortable with doing, maybe you don't have the time, the space, or the tools to do so, feel free to check out our dealer locator. However, if you are ready to get these installed yourself, then follow along and I'll show you how we did ours. First up, we need to remove the wheel with a 19mm socket. Just take your lug nuts off. They might get stuck in your socket because it's swollen, so bounce it off the ground, pop that out. We're just going to remove all of them. And we'll get that wheel off and set that aside. We need to get our grease cap off, so we'll just tap it on the side with a hammer. Once that's off, need to pop this retainer clip off, probably get a screwdriver and pop that off. Just try not to damage it too much. We will be reusing this. Set that aside somewhere safe. Then our nut, you should be able to loosen that by hand. So take that off. And again, we're reusing that. And the last thing we're reusing is this washer, so set that aside with the rest of them. And this bearing can be trashed. Just hit the drum. You may need to hit it with a hammer to break it loose, but ours is coming off pretty easy. We'll set that aside. We have 5 9/16 nuts to remove. With those removed, we should be able to break our brake assembly loose. Might be a little seized on there. Before you pull it out too far, you see these wires. They're going into the axle. We can just cut those off. So just cut them from the back. That way we can tuck that wire back into the axle. And we'll set this aside. We're going to clean up all this old grease, so just use some brake clean and some rags. Get as much off there as you can. These studs need to be taken off. We're not going to reuse those, so just tap them with a hammer. Be careful not to hit your spindle when you're back swinging. It really shouldn't take much to pop them off. In the instructions, it says that it prefers being in the 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock position. However, with our axle setup, if I were to line it up like that, you'll notice there's a bolt hole that we're not using in either 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock. And so the only orientation I've found that actually utilizes all of our holes is like this, which should perform just fine. I'd just rather have the security of using all of the bolt holes that we have over the orientation. So I'll get our hardware in, just dab each bolt with a little bit of blue Loctite, slip your split washer over, and then thread your nut on. I'll do that with the other 4 bolts. Now we can tighten them down. I'll tighten them down in a star pattern and also do a star pattern once I torque them each down. It's the same 9/16 inch socket. You may need to use a wrench to hold the bolt on the back side, but I haven't had to do that. I'm just using my finger to hold it. Now we'll torque those bolts down to the specification listed in the instructions. If you don't have your own torque wrench, we do have some of the options available here at eTrailer, or you can rent one from your local auto parts store. Just go through once again in that star pattern and get them torqued down. Now we're ready to move on to getting our hub ready to install. So we'll take our inner bearing, and we need to pack this full of grease, so just get a good amount of grease in your hand and work that in with your palm. We're just trying to work that grease all the way through until we can see it on the other side. So once you see it coming through, just rotate it. We'll just work around the entire bearing. Once you've got that fully packed, we'll just drop that into our hub. And we can move on to our outer bearing while our hands are still covered in grease. Once you have your outer bearing greased, just set that aside for now. And then we're going to grease the spindle up. So might as well use this leftover grease that's on my hands. We can install our seal now. Just kind of push it down, try to keep it as level as possible. And then I'm going to use the back end of a hole saw. You could also use a piece of wood or just something flat that you can hammer this down with. And I'll just hit this a few times. Check the back and just make sure everything is nice and flush. Now we'll slip our hub over our spindle. Try to keep it as straight as possible. That'll help it slide on. You should kind of feel that seal engage. Once that seal's pushed all the way in, take your outer bearing, slide that on, and our washer that we removed earlier, along with our nut. Now with our torque wrench and an 1.5 inch socket, I'm going to tighten this down while rotating the hub in the opposite direction. I like to do this a couple times just to make sure everything's seated properly. And then once you think it's seated properly, we'll just back that nut off, hand tighten, and then we'll take our retainer clip, line it up with the flat part of the spindle, and push it on. Now we can slip our rotor on over our studs. And to make it easier to get the caliper installed, I like to thread a lug nut onto the bottom. That way the rotor isn't moving around while we're trying to get that caliper lined up. We'll take our caliper and flip it over. Just try to keep the pads spread out so you can fit it over that rotor. Should just kind of drop down into place. The bolts, just have to kind of lift up the caliper and try and get them lined up. With this bracket orientation, it's kind of difficult, but once you get them started, we can tighten them the rest of the way down with a 13mm wrench. And we just need to torque those down. We'll take a grease gun and plug it into this circ fitting. We're going to fill it with grease. While we're doing that, I'll occasionally rotate the hub. Then we want to fill it up until we see the grease kind of start to flower out of that bearing. That means it's all full. I'll just take our cap and a dead blow hammer, try to get it centered, and just kind of work around in a circle until it's seated nice and flat, and then we'll repeat that entire process on any other axles that you have left. Before we route our brake lines, it's a good idea to figure out where you're going to mount your actuator. So I've kind of figured out that it's going to tuck right here, but I had this box kind of blocking our access hole, so I drilled a hole through our box. I'm just going to leave everything loose for now, just so I can get back to the wiring and everything later. But I drilled a hole through that box and then routed through that access hole, and then we'll hop underneath and I'll show you the routing I took from there. Now we're underneath our camper. Our access hole is right about here, so I just kind of cut out a hole that I'll cover back up, but you can see our brake hose comes out from there, and from here I basically just followed this pipe all the way back to our axles. So I just made sure to zip tie it every once in a while, make sure it's not hanging down, but other than that I just followed that pipe. So once we got towards the axle, I realized I had a little bit too much hose, so I just put a little bend in it just to keep any slack from hanging down. And then we come to our first junction here. This is a 4-way junction that we're using, and I just used a 3/8 line wrench and a 13mm wrench on this end to get those nice and tight. I did have to build a bracket to get that mounted, but you could most likely just zip tie that down if you preferred. And then from our 4-way, I actually had to add on some 90-degree angle hoses in order to clear our leaf springs here, but there's one 90-degree angle hose here and then one on the other axle, and then the other connection on our 4-way just goes across to the other side of the camper. So we came over to the passenger side. I did have to put a loop in it because it was a little bit long, but I'll just show you how I'm tightening these down. I'm holding this end and slipping a line wrench over it. Just getting that really tight. You can't really, I mean, I've never ruined the threads on these, and unless you really crank it down as tight as you can get it, it will most likely leak. So just make sure you get those all as tight as possible. But here's our 3-way junction on the passenger side. Same thing, I'll probably build a bracket for that to support it, but we're just running once again to two 90-degree angle hoses to the calipers. Once you have all of your hoses tightened down, we can move on to our wiring on our actuator. I'd recommend just filling up your actuator with fluid just in case it turns on while you're wiring everything up. That way you have fluid, you don't want to run it dry. So we'll go through the wires real quick. Our black is ran down through that access hole. I had to extend it out with another wire, but that is our 12-volt power. I actually extended out all of these wires. So white goes down to ground down there. Yellow is for our breakaway switch. And the blue here, that mounts to our blue wire coming from our 7-way. So we'll go down underneath to our junction and I'll try to show you what we did down there. So here's the hole that our wires came down through. As I said, I extended it out. However, I didn't have any yellow wire, so this black wire here is our yellow. But our black and our blue and our white all plugged into our junction box back here. I just located the wires coming off of our 7-way and matched them up. So the blue goes to blue, white goes to the ground, and the black goes to 12-volt power, which is red in our case. From there, our yellow wire just tapped into our breakaway switch, which is farther up here. And we also have a breakaway battery system that we wired into. So depending on your setup, yours might look a little different, but we wired into our breakaway battery and then ran that to our breakaway switch. For this step, you're going to need a partner to either press the brakes on your truck or use what we have, a tester, to run the brakes. So we're going to have to bleed them. So you can either use a catch can or something like this. We've just rigged a hose through a Gatorade bottle. And I'll take a 7/16 inch wrench, open up my bleeder, and then I'll say, open! He's going to run the actuator, then I'll close it. And then during this process, make sure your partner knows to make sure that the actuator has fluid in it the entire time. And so we're just going to start bleeding with the furthest caliper away from the actuator and then work our way to the closest. And what we want to see is eventually when I open this up and run it, we won't be seeing any more bubbles. Open! Close. Once you've bled all of your calipers, you can close them up. Then I'd recommend to just run your actuator for a bit, climb underneath and check all of your connections, make sure there's no drips or anything. If you do have a leak, then just tighten that down, check it again. And then I would go around and just bleed each caliper one more time, get all the air out of there. Because if you have a leak, that means it's sucking in air. But other than that, we just need to get this actually bolted down and clean up all of our wires. All that's left is to throw our wheels back on, get them torqued down, and then hit the road. DeeMaxx does recommend to do kind of a break-in procedure with these to get the maximum performance out of them. So I'd just find a nice open parking lot or something similar and do some solid stops. After that, you'll notice the performance really increasing. Other than that, that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the DeeMaxx disc brakes on our 2018 Keystone Cougar Half-Ton Travel trailer.